Hey, everybody, this is Kira Davis from Just Listen to Yourself right here on the FCB Radio Network, and I've got a great problem. I need a new theme song for the show. So I am asking listeners to send in their submissions for new theme songs for Just Listen to Yourself. If you are a musician or a songwriter or just somebody who wants to try their hand at it, go ahead and send us a song that you think could be used for the theme of Just Listen to Yourself. You could have the chance to win $150, but better than that, your song could get an official release on the Orchard and Sony Records. That's right. The Orchard and Sony Records will release your song as an official single, and it'll get played all across the FCB Radio Network to start and maybe beyond. Send your entry to JLTY@protonmail.com. Contest closes May 31st.
This is the FCB Radio Network, home of the best personalities and where real talk lives. Online at fcbradio.com. FCB.
Hi, it's Kira. Welcome to another JLTY Minisode. I'm calling them Minisodes, but this one kind of got a few minutes longer than I would have preferred, except that my subject today is a very funny guy, and we were having such a great conversation. It wasn't long enough to split into two, but not short enough to call a Minisode, but it's my show, so I'm going to call it a Minisode anyways. But today I have for you my friend and a comedian, Lou Perez. He is a great guy. He's got his own locals channel. I'm always pushing my locals channel community. He's got his. You're going to find out where you can find him online. Please enjoy my conversation with comedian Lou Perez. Okay, Lou. Well, we've known each other for quite a while now, and we kind of hover around the same industries. We don't necessarily do the same things, but we've appeared on each other's shows, and you've been involved. I hate to use the word politically with you, because you're really first and foremost a comedian. And I think you kind of tripped into the political realm just because, I think, by virtue of being a comedian. When did you find, first of all, how long have you been doing stand-up comedy? And when did you find that the landscape was changing in a way that was making it like a little bit difficult or angsty, or you realized, oh, I don't have as much freedom here as I thought I would?
Well, I've been doing comedy, which includes sketch comedy and improv, for like close to 20 years. So I started when I was in college. I'm 39. I started doing stand-up comedy later than that. I think the first time I did stand-up, I was 27 or 28. But my main gig has been doing sketch comedy, and you're right in that I kind of tripped into doing political sketch comedy or satire, and that a few years back I was introduced to somebody who was kind of like a talent scout, I guess, for a program called We the Internet, and they were looking to do sketch comedy that takes on politics. And at the time I'm like, well, I haven't really taken on politics, but I had like over a decade of sketch experience there. So We the Internet was sort of my opportunity to bring together my sketch and then also, sort of my political and cultural point of view. And so I started, when I started doing comedy, I was performing at the Upright Citizens Brigade Theater in New York. Oh. And there was very much this, sort of this attitude that anything goes, anything that you could do, on stage, just go for it. And I also started out like sort of in the early days of YouTube, where it was very easy to just put stuff up there and not really worry about, censorship or anything like that. I think obviously that's changed over the past, I would say like 5 years or so. It's probably been
like really recently.
Yeah. It's fairly recently. So it even now, if I get something that's dinged as hate speech or going against community standards, my mind can't process it, because I'm like, wait, how can this joke? Yeah. How is this joke going against community standards or anything like that? But But rather than, trying to, work around censors and whatnot, I'm just of the mind of, well, just put it out. And if it gets dinged and taken down, well, you have more jokes. So just keep going.
But
So
do you feel like the area that you have to tell jokes in is starting to shrink? Because I don't know if I told you this, Lou, but last year I did I had a bucket list. I have this bucket list. And one of the bucket list items is stand-up comedy for me. I've just always wanted to try, I'm not trying to be a comedian. I've just always wanted to learn how to form a stand-up routine. Like, what's it like to stand on stage and deliver jokes? How do you write a joke? I didn't know any of that. And so I had a great time, and I did, as part of my little bucket list experiment, I did like a season of open mics and stuff around Orange County. And I noticed that a lot of the comedians who were younger than me, and I'm in my 40s now, who were younger than me, there was this pattern, right? Everybody would apologize within their routine. So you tell a joke, and then the routine now is, because it feels like everyone's so sensitive, the routine goes something like this. I'm telling you a joke that's borderline and it's going to make you cringe, and then I'm going to apologize for the joke. Oh, Lou, everybody knows that idiots wear blue shirts. Ha ha ha. I'm sorry, you guys. It's just a joke. Calm down. That's the comedy routine now, right? Like, people are always having to apologize for just, I guess, pushing the envelope. But to me, it's just telling jokes. Do you find that? Do you notice that too?
that's a really interesting thing to notice. If there's any time that I feel like apologizing, it's for when I don't entertain a crowd, where it's like, I'm so sorry that I am up here and I still have more time to do, and you guys are not feeling this whatsoever.
I still have like 35 minutes left in this routine.
Oh my God! Like, early in my stand-up career, and by early I mean, like, one of the first gigs that I got paid for. An old professor of mine from college, who's been a big fan of mine ever since I took his class. He hooked me up with this gig for a Christmas show, and it was like like a corporate, some company was having a Christmas party, and I guess the year before they had booked a mentalist. Like, that's a pretty fun thing, to do, like, a guy comes and reads your mind and all that. And then this year they decided to get a comedian who, I guess, I was not as seasoned as they expected, and it was one of the most painful half hours I had ever done, just standing in front of people. I don't even think there was a microphone, so it was like me kind of going a cappella in front of all these people. And then afterwards I got the check, and it was a nice check. It was like $500.
Nice.
For a half hour's worth of work. But the son of an immigrant in me was like, I did not earn this. I just stole this from these people, and I should really, give it back. But fortunately, the capitalist in me was like, no, it's still my money. I still got up there, whatever.
Yeah.
It was a defective product. But it's very weird because especially if you're doing open mics, the idea of apologizing for what you're putting out there. I mean, the understanding should be that you're trying new stuff, and there's an opportunity that it will fail. So yeah, that's really weird, having people apologize. But can you try?
But yeah, I worry about comedy. I love comedy. That's one of the reasons why stand-up comedy was on my bucket list. The way people listen to music, that's how I listen to comedy. That's how I listen to other comedians. Like, I love the rhythm of it. I love the style of it. I love breaking down styles. Like, that to me was my favorite part of the class. And but I just wonder if there's even that space for people to experiment and learn and like, when I was on that very brief circuit, what I saw were a lot of people who were afraid of the crowd almost. And I mean, don't you feel like there's a bit of bravery that comes with comedy? Like, what is funny, Lou? Like, is funny? Is funny like coming up to the line and crossing it or almost crossing it, or is funny like just kind of pointing out funny things in people's lives? Like, where's the line here between comedy and just outright bizarreness or rudeness? Or I just feel like that line's getting blurred these days, and I'm just always curious how comedians are actually dealing with it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that we're sort of in this time where, technologically speaking, there's no better time to be a comedian because you might find that, hey, you know what, stand up isn't really for me, but doing a podcast is a way for me to get out my comedy, or doing videos might be a way to get out my comedy, or even, the people doing well on TikTok,
right?
Like, that might be that, that's your that's your way to get your stuff out there. And I think all that stuff, can be funny. I wonder if part of it, there's obviously the social pressures and the changing of, what is considered acceptable to laugh about, to joke about. And I think there's also something to do with work ethic changing as well. There are a lot of people, young people coming up who, kind of are of the mind that their first draft is the draft that needs to be accepted, as opposed to no, like you might have to work on a bit for like 6 months before you get it to work, and I think also there's kind of a trap that people might set for themselves where, say they do an off-color joke and it doesn't work. Nowadays, it's very easy to say, oh, the crowd's a bunch of snowflakes, or, you guys are just politically correct, as opposed to, maybe that joke didn't work because the joke didn't work. Maybe there's a way, that I could do something with that joke to turn it around and make it and to make it work. But yeah, and that's, I think for young comedians, they're definitely they're dealing with a lot, because it's also, like you said, like, your bucket list was to get up on stage for the first time, which, is already something that most people will never have the guts to do. And I think it's really important for older comedians, seasoned comedians, for the culture in general to, say to young people, especially in comedy, give it a shot. It's okay to fail. And we're not going to jump down your throat and try to, make sure you never do this again, just because we don't like the subject matter that you're bringing up.
I like though the idea that you say, like, it's not just about, either way, it's not just about your audience being snowflakes or your audience being like over the top social justice warriors that are oversensitive about everything. Maybe a lot of what we're talking about in comedy these days and how comedians are struggling, and this is an age-old question for comedians, right? Just struggling with what you can get away with in front of an audience and in public and on TV, right? Comedians are always pushing the envelope and should always be. But sometimes maybe you're not pushing the envelope. You just have not developed this joke enough. You just have not actually thought through. You can't just get up there and just start riffing and then you've got a perfect routine and the audience is rolling. And there's probably a lot of young people. I mean, when I was doing that few months on the open mic circuit, there was a couple of young guys that were like, they were never prepared, but they thought they were the funniest people in the world, probably because they just tell a lot of funny stories at parties and somebody said, you should be a comedian. And they would be so endlessly frustrated on stage that their jokes wouldn't land. But it's like, you haven't put any work into it. Maybe it's not the audience's fault. Sometimes, and maybe we as an audience need to remember this too, watching comedy we like and feeling like, if we feel like, oh, our favorite comedian just pulled that punch, or he didn't go in the direction I thought he should. Maybe sometimes we as an audience need to give comedians space to work out maybe it's on you is what I'm saying. Maybe the onus is on you. I like that point that you made. It doesn't necessarily have to be the audience's fault. Sometimes you need to go back. It's the same way with punditry. So it's not necessarily the audience's fault that they didn't understand you properly. Sometimes you need to go back and rejigger things.
Yeah. And like you said, you and I were sort of in this world where we're constantly, hearing about, cancellations or, someone getting in trouble for saying this or someone losing their job, or cancel culture in general. So it could sometimes be easy to forget that, there are a lot of people out there doing the kind of comedy that we like and doing it and succeeding at it. And I think with the pandemic, a lot of people, it was a great example of like sink or swim for a lot of comedians, and the comedians that came out of it doing really well. So I have my friend, Chrissy Mayer, who, she's a stand-up comedian. She hosts a number of podcasts, and she often was taking heat from a lot of, other comedians. Right. But the difference is like, she was working, like she was booking shows, she was hitting the road. She was grinding on her podcast and making stuff happen. She was putting, short videos out there. She wasn't allowing, the pandemic or, what everybody was going through to be a reason for her not to push herself, and I think it's been I think it's shown that, there are a lot of people out there who love comedy and are going to support the people that they love. And, so an audience is definitely out there. It's just, for a few years, you're going to have to deal with a lot of stuff. And for those people, if any of those comedians that, you described at the mics who apologize, during their set or listening, try not apologizing.
That's what I always wonder. What's the joke sound like if you don't apologize after it?
Just put it out there. Put it out there and see what happens.
Because I even noticed Dave Chappelle doing it on his last very successful group of Netflix specials that he did. The first one was a little weird because he seemed to maybe cave a little to some of the social pressure for how he was speaking. And Dave Chappelle's old school, so he was just speaking like an old school guy, but we're in new times and he got pinged for it. And so you could see him working out that awkwardness in the first episode, but then in the next two, you could tell he was like, screw it, this is not my, I'm just going for it. This is my comedy. I know who I am as a comedian. But even still, he would tell a few jokes and he'd be like, well, I don't care if y'all don't laugh, folks. Like, that was just a joke. Even that's an apology, and then when I was on the circuit, I would wonder that, like, what does this joke sound like if you don't apologize? You just tell the joke, let it drop, and move on. Do you think that that's an issue of trust for the audience? Like, you don't trust the audience?
Well, also, I wonder, now I'm wondering if the apology is sort of not necessarily a tick, but it's like, how apologetic can you possibly be? You told the joke already.
Yeah.
I mean, if you were really sorry about it, you wouldn't have said it in the first place. I wonder. Yeah. For example, when I speak, I use the word like a lot. A lot.
Yeah.
And I wonder if I'm sorry, if I'm sorry is becoming another version of that.
It could be like a defense mechanism too. Like, I know this joke just dropped and it's terrible. Sorry about that. Like, it could be a way. It's self-observational. It's self-awareness. And I think in comedy you have to have a certain amount of self-awareness, but too much is too much. Too much becomes awkward. Like the guy on the comedy circuit I was going to, that he also had a part of his routine which was just deeply, deeply, deeply personal and like not funny in any way. Just like, no, dude, you need to go get counseling. You haven't made this funny. Yeah.
Well, you're giving me a lot to put in my head because I'm this Friday I'm driving up to Rollinsford, New Hampshire to do a show where I'm headlining, and I'm bringing up two friends of mine who are also comedians. So it's like, oh man, I hope I'm able to push out all the
sorry, I
stuff
got in your brain, Lou.
that we're talking about. But you brought up something, describing that guy, telling those stories, those personal stories, and you're like, you need more therapy than anything. I think that's been one of the issues with a lot of this stuff, where it's like, it takes somebody like Richard Pryor, who's one of my all-time favorite comedians. Richard would talk about some really terrible stuff from his life.
Yeah.
But the humor would be the catharsis.
Yes.
The jokes about it. There would be, it's sort of like the tension, and here's the joke. Here's the funny part of it, right?
Yeah.
Whereas I feel like I'm seeing just too many people that it's just the trauma that's being put out there. And it's like, what are you trying to, what is this person trying to do up there with this trauma? Is it, are they not, or have they not fully embraced what happened to them and changed it for themselves? And they want other people to feel the hurt that they had, which is a really weird, it's kind of a terrible thing to do to an audience, I think, especially if an audience is looking to laugh,
But why? Well, this brings me to, I know you get this all the time, but I'm going to ask you anyway, because I have a comedian in front of me, a real live comedian, so I can ask. But like, why? What is it about being damaged that leads people into comedy? I mean, almost every comedian I know, no offense, is like, it's like it's all coming out of some trauma, almost all of it. I mean, probably to a person. Comedians are, for those of you who've never had the opportunity to be in a green room with comedians, like, comedians are very competitive people. They have a jovial, it looks jovial on stage, but like a lot of times comedians aren't necessarily the best people to be hanging out with or the most fun, because they are people who have dealt with a lot of trauma in their lives, and like you mentioned, Richard Pryor. But what is it about comedy, like for you, even if you want to bring your personal experience into it, like what is it about comedy that allows so many people with so much trauma to actually like excel in sharing that trauma?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wonder if if having that type of personality just opens up, doors of perception that a quote unquote normal mind just wouldn't have. I've actually wanted to talk to, there's a professor named Jeffrey Miller who years ago wrote a piece in Quillette about how current speech codes on college campuses would deter our human geniuses from ever either getting into academia or pursuing their work. And the example that he gives is Isaac Newton, who I think I think a lot of people agree was sort of on the spectrum somewhere where it comes to autism, either Asperger's or something like that. Yeah. And he was a type of guy who would just say whatever is on his mind, just blurt it out, even if it was highly offensive.
Right.
And the case that Jeffrey Miller was making is that these codes are basically terrible for people who are neuroatypical, who are just not normal minds. Oh, wow. And I've wanted to talk to him about that, where I think there's something about a comedian's mind that is neuroatypical.
Yeah.
And to give you an example of this, I was on this like conference call a while back, and there was a woman there who was talking about basically what people are looking for when they're filling panels, right?
Yeah.
And she said something along the lines of, they don't want any straight white men, and she made a joke like, and thank God, or something like that. And I went and I started Googling this woman, and it turns out that, tragically, she had been married to a guy who died very, very young. He was like 30, right? And he was a white guy. And my first thought was, well, thank God, one less straight white man, right? Now, look, I had no control over that thought
Yes.
that came into my head, and then I called up. I talked to a friend of mine who's also a comedian, and his first thing that he said was a joke along the same lines, and it's something where that's just how my mind works, man. You know, like I have, well, you know, one of the go-to. One of the go-to sort of put downs that people have is ooh, edgy. Oh, such an edgy joke you just made. and unless you know me, it's very hard to explain to you, look, this thing just popped into my head and I put it out there. These edgy jokes or whatever, it's not like I'm going out of my way to try to offend or anything like that. It's there. It's what's growing in my garden, and I dig it up and I put it out there, and then I'm on to the next thing. So I think there might be something there. Just I don't know if it's a chemical imbalance. I don't know if it's the way our brains are put together, but I think comedians are just a little different.
I do too, Lou. I think that there is a definitely a connection, even if it's tacit, but there's a connection, I think, between true comedy, because there's a lot of idiots in comedy, but true comedy and genius, and the comedians that I love the most they embody exactly what you just said. They're not trying that hard to be intellectual. It's just that they have these neurons that kind of fire, and they make these connections in a way that connects something that's very important societally to, their very raw thoughts about it. And then the combination comes out as humor, or they massage it to make it humorous. That doesn't mean that comedians are smarter than everybody else, because you can sound really smart on stage and get off stage and be a complete moron. I know plenty of comedians that are like that. But there are some who are authentic, and those people turn out to be very successful comedians. They authentically they connect the intellect to the material. And that's why you get such like biting social commentary that makes you laugh your ass off, but also makes you think, from people like Carlin and Richard Pryor and Dave Chappelle. And so I agree with you, Lou. I think that all the time when I meet comedians. I think there's something just a little off about this guy, or there's something a little off about this girl. Like, most of them are just a little bit different, and it does make me think that the comedian's brain is just maybe it's the trauma that rewires it. Who knows? I don't know. I'm not like a rocket surgeon, as I like to say on this show, but maybe there's something with the trauma, or just something personality wise. But I think you're onto something there.
And I think there's something too where, there are people with comedic minds who don't necessarily do comedy. And I think that's something. I think that's one of the great things about social media, is that it's allowed so many people, civilians, if you will, who aren't, trying to make it in the comedy game, step up and toss out their jokes, toss out their takes on the world. I got a bunch of guys who follow me on Twitter who are way funnier than a lot of comedians that I know. But they're doing things like chemical engineering and stuff like that, and
they're doing important things.
They're happy in their in their chosen professions.
Yeah.
And I happen to find that a lot of I prefer a lot of writers to comedians too. I find myself checking in a lot with writers like Lionel Shriver, the novelist and journalist. Oh. She writes for The Spectator quite often.
Yeah.
And I think she's hilarious and insightful and cutting, and it's awesome. Oh. Kevin D. Williamson as well, over at National Review.
Yeah.
He's somebody who I'm like, I'm going to find there's going to be a line or something there that I think is really worth the read.
It's funny. Yeah. Because it's the same deal with writers as it is with comedians. We all seem better on paper than we are in real life. You get in a room with those people, and I can guarantee you it's going to be. I know some of the people that you admire, and it's like, oh, that they would not be. You get in a room with these people, and they're like they're like savants. You know, they really don't have a lot. They pour their social aspects of themselves onto the page. They don't have any left for real life.
I'll say this about myself. I think I'm the only person who sounds worse in context than out of context. So,
well, we could talk forever. I want to wrap this up because then we're going to go on. I'm going to do your podcast.
Yeah.
I want to ask you, as a comedian, who's your favorite comedian? Like, I feel like everybody's got a comedian that is like their archetype or someone that they model after or they look at as a mentor, whether or not they know them personally. When I was in my little community college comedy class, every professor that came through that room was like, Brian Regan was like, he's a master of the mechanics of a joke, the mechanics of a routine. So there are a lot of comedians that like Brian Regan. He's a comedian's comedian. There are a lot of comedians that love Norm Macdonald. He's a comedian's comedian. He's not super famous, but the mechanics of what he does are very attractive to people who are in the business. Is there anybody like that for you?
Well, it's funny you bring up Norm Macdonald because over the past few months, I've just been binging every Norm Macdonald interview.
Love Norm Macdonald.
I guess he's ever done. But I think he's a comedian who I think I enjoy his interviews more than his stand-up.
Yes.
I feel like the stuff that he comes out with during an interview, also, his the balls on him, to do some of this stuff, to go on the View. To go on the View and talk about how the Clintons murdered a guy to Barbara Walters, and he's like, I thought this was common knowledge, Yeah, so he's somebody who I've been really really admiring, and also his incredible humility too. He's somebody who's incredibly insightful, but yet so humble.
Well, he's from a fisher town. Like, he's from my part of Canada, which is the East Coast. That's the Atlantic. That's Nova Scotia. He's from Nova Scotia. I'm from Prince Edward Island, and they're basically part of the Maritimes there. And he's from a small fishing community. I know the community that he's from. It's farmers. It's fishermen. Wow. Have you read or listened to his book based on a true story, his memoirs?
I read his book. Unfortunately, I wasn't that big of a fan of it. There were parts that I enjoyed.
Yeah.
But I probably just wanted a straight up, biography.
It wasn't that, but I recommend listening to it instead of reading it. It's a whole different experience. I love Norm Macdonald, but I love to hear like how other comedians look at like where you're getting your inspiration from, what you're modeling your career off of. When you craft a joke on stage, are you thinking of a certain comedian that like, okay, this guy does it this way?
They're especially when I first started doing stand-up, there were a bunch of times when it was like, oh, you kind of look like George Carlin. I like to say I look like George Carlin with muscles, and kind of look like him. And you're kind of delivering things like him, like his. There's this one guy. I say that this one joke I have where I say I have to maintain my beard because if I let it grow too long, I start to look like the creepy guy who's too old to be hanging out at the skate park. It's like he's the guy who says, "Hey, you kids want me to buy you some beer or teach you how to kiss?" Like I start, but that's me doing a Carlin. I mean that's
right.
That voice is Carlin. And it's almost like I have no control over it because it just feels so.
It feels right.
Yeah, it just feels right. Would you mind if we just rolled into?
Not at all. Okay. Not at all. Let me close us out. And then we can get started with you. Okay. Well, Lou, I want to thank you so much for joining us today and just sharing a little bit about your life in comedy. Tell the JLTY listeners where they can find out more about you and find more of your stuff.
Yeah, you can check, you can sign up for my newsletter at thelouperez.com. But most importantly, if you can join thelouperez.locals.com, that would be fantastic. Kira's also on Locals, and I hope it's the future, and I'm happy to be on the platform with such great talented people as Kira.
We got to do like a crossover on Locals sometime.
That'd be great.
Yeah, sometime soon. All right. Well, thank you, Lou. God bless you. I'll talk to you later.
See you.
Politics are becoming more and more divisive every day. My name is Colin Jackson. I'm the co-host of Not Another Political Podcast, where we reject popular opinions and prioritize solutions over partisan dogma. Download Not Another Political Podcast on iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcast entertainment today.
That was comedian Lou Perez, a friend of mine, very talented comedian. You can find him on his socials. He gave you all the places to look for him. Definitely go check him out. And thank you for tuning in to another Minisode. I know this was a little longer than a Minisode, but we were having such a good time. I didn't want to cut off the conversation, and it wasn't long enough to split into two. So I hope you'll bear with me. Don't forget, we've got our theme song contest going on, and we're extending that until May 31st. So you've got time. Send it to JLTY at protonmail.com. Send your submission. Win a chance. You could have a chance to win $150 and an official song release from The Orchard and Sony Music. So definitely go do that. As always, join us over at davisnation.locals.com for more of me and more conversation. And we'll see you next time here on JLTY.
The FCB Radio Network. First class broadcasting worldwide.